So the first one, inherent contradiction.
Yeah. If everything is just material, then there's no meaning, there's no intention, there's no significance, it's just physical laws acting. Which means that when somebody says everything's material, that's just physical laws acting, and it's also meaningless. So in other words, I don't know what you call it, but anyway, Eccles calls it promissory materialism. It contradicts itself right from the beginning. The moment you open your mouth and say that, immediately it's nonsense.
In the four causes of Aristotle, and in the Bhagavatam also the fourth cause, Aristotle calls the last cause the teleological cause, or the purpose, the meaning.
In Bhagavatam also?
And the Bhagavatam it's called Artha, and there's a hierarchy also. So you have four Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, and then there's Pancham Purushartha, Prema Pumato Mahan. The Artha, the purpose, is to attain Prem. That's the ultimate purpose. And so you have in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Janmadhyasya Tanvayaditarascha Arteshu, in the different arthas. So the arthas of the teleological purpose indicates goal-directedness.
Yeah.
That we see in everything around us, not only in animate, so-called animate matter like human beings. We all act because we have goals. But even in inanimate matter, things have goal-directedness. And so, for example, if you look at the water cycle, the sun shines and it evaporates the ocean and turns into clouds, and that purifies the water because plants can't take the salt water, and then the wind blows them and drops the water on the land, and then that waters the plants, and then the water runs off, goes in the river, and then the rivers all make their way back to the ocean again and get evaporated. So you have everywhere this goal-directedness, where each part is, in one sense, the instrumental cause or ingredient cause of the next part. But if you just explain, well, this causes this and this causes this, you only explain the material or instrumental relations between the parts. But you haven't explained the sangat. That means the aggregate of the whole system, the goal-directedness of the whole system. And that argument is also used in Vedanta. And you see that also in there's a rock cycle in the earth, where the rocks go through different stages, and then they make their way to the core, and then they get melted down, and then they come out through the volcanoes, and they come out again. So the whole world, all the water in the world, all the rocks in the world, everything's going round in these cycles where each part is essential for all the other parts, but each part has no awareness of any of the other parts. So they just, how does that work? And so in the same way, let's say if a scientist will say, well, the heart developed in this way because it's more effective for pumping blood. But the heart itself is made of the individual atoms and molecules who have no idea of their role in the body. So there's no way that they can self-select to be better, to fulfill the purpose that they have no. And so what the scientists are doing everywhere in their explanations of how physical things work is they're injecting the teleological purpose, they're injecting artha, they're injecting the fourth cause to explain why this matter is behaving this way. But their concept of the matter is that it's an ingredient or it's an instrument. But they strip everything of the final cause or the teleological cause. And then they surreptitiously insert it in their explanation. I hope you won't notice.
Whatever they're saying with intention.
And so when they describe it, they themselves have intention as well.
They have to admit intention. Where's that intention coming from? If everything's just matter, then how come you get conscious scientists with intention? So they're smuggling in through the back door what they're kicking out through the front door.
Another example of that is is, for example, they'll say that DNA contains all the information about your body. So you can examine the DNA and you'll see which part of the DNA is for the skin and the hair and the blood and the height and the weight and the species or whatever it is. So they say all the information is there in the DNA. The problem is that information is related to consciousness. It's not related
It's not
to...
physical.
It's not physical. Information is not physical. For example, because people say, well, I put information into the computer and the computer is storing the information. And then the computer can then regurgitate that information and the answer will come up on the screen. But what comes up on the screen is just a particular mechanical configuration of pixels. And then it takes a conscious being to look at how those pixels are, and it's a letter, and the letter makes a word, and the word has a meaning to that person, but it means nothing to the computer. So the whole idea that matter is organizing itself because it stores information is another surreptitious sliding in to all the things which are exclusive to consciousness into a physicalist explanation. And therefore, so we're discussing how physicalism itself is just completely incoherent.
That thing with DNA, first of all, that amounts of information can't appear spontaneously. Like Sariputta proved that. That's one thing. But then you think how...
But I'm not even giving them the privilege to call it information. It's not information until a conscious being reads it.
Right.
Just like a novel is ink on a page until a person who knows that language can read it. But until then, it's just black ink on a white page. It's not a novel.
Okay. That's one. And the secondary contradictory evidence. This, I don't know how people let the scientists get away with it. But we see everywhere that living beings do what matter can't do. I mean, it's stunning. I looked on the internet. I can't find any evidence that anyone's discussing this.
I've made a multimedia presentation with so many animations on this very subject.
Okay.
And what it revolves around is the scientists have this theory called autogenesis, you know? What happens is if you look at an egg under the microscope, at the beginning, all the cells in the egg, they're exactly the same.
And then differentiate.
And then gradually they differentiate and become different kinds of cells to produce whatever skin or fingers or whatever it is. And you can watch it under a microscope. All the cells are the same, and suddenly they just start moving around, and then they start to organize themselves. And the scientists call this autogenesis, which auto just means themselves, and Genesis is the first book of the Bible that describes how God creates the world, right? So they call it autogenesis, that the individual cells are just organizing themselves. And so they speculate that it happens by chance, according to the Turing equations.
I'm pointing at something different, that, I mean, you look at the Trans-Siberian Railway, for example. You've got 8,000 kilometers of rails, deadly, I mean, all engineered. You've got the electrics like that, connected up with hydroelectric schemes. How could physical laws produce that system? Or how can physical laws produce something like this? In America, they got one project, they've got a vacuum, it's a mile long. Huge. I mean, I think it's got the diameter of like this room, maybe. And it's 8 times more perfect vacuum than outer space. So how can the physical laws produce this?
Well, you know what they're going to say. They're going to say that you're begging the question, because the physical laws over millions of years of evolution brought about the human beings who made it. So ultimately, the physical laws.
No, I don't accept that, because if you calculate the probability that something like that could come simply by the effect of the physical laws, you find out that it's not possible.
Yeah, but you can throw back to them, well, actually, you're begging the question because your conclusion is based on the premise that the human beings themselves came about by physical laws.
But we do things that physical laws don't do. We rearrange things, or bring things together like this. They can separate out rare earth elements. I'm just talking like scientific chemical. They separate out, for example, the inert gases. by fractional distillation of liquid air, they can produce xenon and radon, all these things. So how could that possibly happen? By physical laws only. Physical laws can't do that. They mix things up. They don't separate them out. So you have situations which are monumentally impossible just by the action of the physical laws. Two things. I mean, how can the scientists think like that? And secondly, how can people let them get away with it? It's mad. I mean, it's really, really mad. The whole spectrum of human civilization is totally against the physical laws. Right from when you start toilet training, you're acting against the physical laws. It's amazing. I mean, it's really, after, ahani, bhutani, I think this is the second most amazing thing in the world. Stunning. So, then one of the things that we do, that matter doesn't do, is science. And they got a big problem here. That they're trying to say that consciousness comes from matter. Okay, so at this point we can say, look, we want you to say what you're talking about. Before you say you can explain anything, we want you to define what you're talking about. So we take this simple statement, consciousness comes from matter. Okay. So what do you mean by consciousness? Well, at the end of the day, it's what we use to be aware of matter. Okay, great. So what do you mean by matter? Empirical science means the science of experience. So matter is what we experience. How do you do that? Well, through consciousness. So in other words, your idea that consciousness comes from matter boils down to consciousness comes from something I'm already conscious of. That's BS.
That's called Anyonyashray dosh in Sanskrit. Anyonyashray. Anyonya means Anya, Anyonya, Ashray dosh. The fault of one thing, which is the support for another, itself being supported for the thing that it's supporting.
Good. Love it.
Anyonyashray dosh.
Love it.
It's like saying that he's the father of him, and he's the father of him, and he's the father of him.
Right.
That's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly like saying, I can catch you by the knees and lift you off the ground, or you can catch me and lift me off the ground, or we can catch each other's knees and fly. So that's Anyonyashray dosh.
Love it. Where's that?
Anyonyashray dosh.
No, I've written it down, but where?
The reference, I take that reference from Jiva Goswami's deconstruction of Advaitavad in Sarva Sambhadini, the first volume on Tattva Sandarbha. Because what he basically says there, he says that Shankaracharya is saying that the empirical world, it's the mistake of the jiva. Right? Because the jiva is in Maya, so he sees an empirical world that doesn't exist. Right? But then again he says, why does Brahman think that he's a jiva? Because he's in Maya. So Maya is created by the jiva, and the jiva is created by Maya. If you get the different parts of Shankar's philosophy and you put them together, you'll find this Anyonyashray dosh, where his explanation has no support. Because on one part of his philosophy, Maya is responsible for the existence of the jiva, and then he explains that Maya is the bewilderment of the jiva. And it applies here in the same way.
There's any translation of Sarva Sambhadini? You've read it?
Oh, maybe. I think maybe Banu Swami has done Sarva Sambhadini, only the part on Tattva Sandarbha. So I think that may be available.
The reason why I'm asking, okay, the next one.
But that Anyonyashray dosh doesn't belong to Jiva Goswami. It's among the list of logical fallacies in Nyaya.
Okay.
It's just everyone who studies Nyaya, they know all these fallacies and
Western Maybe in a Western logical fallacy term for it as well, I would think.
Yeah.
Then the next thing is that...
Oh, probably in English you might call it the fallacy of interdependent causation. Just throw it there. That's just on that point. I want to suggest something you might add to the list, and that is the contradictory evidence. That the scientists say that the varieties of everything that we see around us comes about by the reaction of the physical laws with a matter. On the other hand, they tell us that all matter is the same. And also the physical laws everywhere are universal. So you can't have it both ways. That the laws acting on the matter produce all the variety and tell us that the laws are universal and all the matter is the same. Then it would just produce the same thing all the time. It would not be responsible for the variety. So that's another inherent contradiction. And I'm taking this from, because if you take the matter to be the ingredient cause and the laws of nature to be the instrumental cause, you haven't explained the third cause of the four causes, the formal cause. And that's what they're always hiding, the formal cause and the final cause of everything. The final cause is the meaning of everything, and the formal cause is the shape that things take, which exactly coalesces and is suitable for its ultimate purpose. And so those are the two causes that they always try to essentially banish from the conversation. But then they surreptitiously slip it in and hope no one will notice.
But we're noticing.
Yeah. For example, I get some oats and some hot water and some milk, and I mix it together and make porridge. And then I throw it on the table. Right? It's going to go splat. If I do it 1,000 times, it goes splat. The splat may be a slightly different shape, but it's not going to come out in the form of an iPhone or an elephant or a tree or anything. So if you have the same ingredients and the same laws, you're going to get just the same thing again and again. So unless there's an intelligence guiding the forms for and having an ultimate purpose, you're not going to have the variety that we see everywhere in the world.
Applying this first principle again, that you have to define what you're talking about. So you're saying that laws act on what? On matter?
Well, they do. I mean, we don't...
Okay, what is a law?
We don't even believe in laws. As I think it was C.S. Lewis, he said, to say that matter, let's say an apple falls from a tree, to say that the apple is obeying the law of gravity is not only to project consciousness onto the apple, but to even give him citizenship. Right? Because someone can be conscious, but unless they're a citizen of the state who has a social contract to obey the laws of the state, then they don't obey the laws even if they're conscious. So C.S. Lewis said, to say that an object obeys the laws of physics is not only to give him consciousness, but to make him a citizen also. Give him a passport.
So this insisting that you explain, define what you're talking about, actually it cuts everything what they're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
The next, objective self-reference. That means no system of objective knowledge can look at itself as an object. So, you've got science, the process of science. Now they say everything in the world can be explained by science. But science can't be explained by science. Objective science. So they're saying that there's nothing supernatural. Supernatural means it's what cannot be explained by material science. But material science can't be explained by material science. So material science is supernatural. And all the individual aspects of material science, on the one hand they're real because they're part of material science, objective science, and on the other hand they're outside the range of objective science because they're part of objective science.
That's actually one of the arguments of Aristotle for the existence of God, in the sense that he says that when you analyze something, let's say you do it through science, you're presenting logical propositions as being either true or false.
Right.
But the propositions don't exist in the world.
Yeah.
Can you see? Give me a bucket full of propositions.
Or where's the law?
They don't exist in the world. And he also says that, well, you can say, well, the propositions A plus B is 2 plus 2 equals 4. That proposition exists in your mind. But then he proposes that if you died, or if everyone died, 2 plus 2, the proposition would still equal 4, whether anyone was conceptualizing or not. And therefore, propositions are mind independent. And since they are mind independent and they're not physical objects, then they're actually transcendental objects. And therefore, science, which is essentially gathering together propositions, the laws of propositions, force equals mass times acceleration, right? E equals mc squared. They're propositions, and so they're abstraction. They're intellectual abstractions of the human being.
Right.
And because the human being has a transcendental nature to him, therefore he can be in contact with the pre-existing propositions, which are true whether he's aware of them or not.
Gordon, can you please speak a little slower? We cannot catch up with your fast speech.
Can your brain run a little bit faster?
My brain can.
Okay, okay, I'll try to speak a bit more slowly. So that's what you're presenting there about science itself can't explain itself, because the very activity of science, or the formulation of science, is not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing, or it's a transcendental thing. That is there. Find that in the arguments of of Aristotle for transcendence, that the intelligence of a human being indicates his transcendental nature, and the arta, or the final purpose of the human being's intelligence, is to find truth.
Yeah.
And the origin of this intelligence is, where do these universal propositions exist? They all exist in the mind of God.
Yeah.
And therefore the purpose of the human intelligence is to search out God. That's his thread of argument.
So,
I want to just address one more thing, because you were saying a very interesting thing about when you ask the scientists, well, what is this science that you are doing?
yes.
When you give a law, well, what is this law? So, this analysis of 4 causes is a brilliant lens for essentially detecting the gobar in their arguments.
Goba. Yes.
Gobar is that pure substance given by Mother Cat. So, the ladies make patties out of it. So, it's a great lens for detecting their inconsistencies. And so, for example, if you take a physical law, any physical law, whatever, force equals mass times acceleration, let's just take a simple thing like that. What you have here, you have some measurable variables, and the law, what they are calling a law, essentially tells us that we can predict by changing the proportion of one variable, the other proportion will change. So the law is actually only telling us the proportions or the relationships between measurable variables. It's not telling us anything ontologically about the world whatsoever.
Completely.
And neither does it tell us why, the law doesn't tell us why the variables change in proportion to each other in that particular way. It just says that they do. So if you increase the acceleration, you'll increase the force. If you increase the mass, you'll increase the force. If you have the same force and you increase the mass, the acceleration will go down and so on. So the laws are not telling you anything about why. They're not telling you anything ontological. They're not telling you anything causal even. The cause is hidden in the equal sign of the equation. It just the actual causation is not in the variables. The cause is hidden in the equal sign. So the causation that makes them all equal when you change the variables has not been addressed at all. It's completely, that question is totally silent, unaddressed, unanswered, and that cause is God, the cause of all causes, the guarantor of the equation. And neither does the equation tell us about the sangat, or the formal cause of the equation itself. Why is this variable on this side of the equation and that variable on that side? Why is this variable multiplied by that variable, or divided by this variable, or squared by that variable? It doesn't address the formal cause at all. And so when someone says, here's a law and therefore we know something, no, you only know about the proportions between measurable variables, but nothing about causation, nothing about sangat, and nothing about ontology has been stated. You only have what I call a formula, which is a predictive abstraction. The formula itself is an abstraction, and you use it to make predictions. And you're so chuffed and pleased and smug with yourself that now you can make a prediction. You become intoxicated by that and forget that you haven't explained anything.
Yes.
Because you have meaning, you have a cause, and your cause is you want to exploit the material energy. And because you have found a technique to exploit the material energy, you're satisfied, and therefore your inquisitiveness has stopped there. So that's my analysis of so-called laws. When you ask, they say, here's a law, we say, well, we kind of lie down on the couch and tell me about your childhood. And we psychoanalyze, well, what do you mean by...
Stephen Hawking says that the laws, or said that the laws exist by themselves. And then Paul Davies, who's another more enlightened physicist, he said this is like, I can't remember, it's like 17th century some kind of theism without God, something like that. The idea that the laws kind of exist. Well, what do they exist in? Laws exist in consciousness. So by talking about laws, first of all, they're abstractions, yeah. How do you describe an abstraction physically? You can't. Immediately you talk about laws, you're assuming consciousness.
So its only value is predicting. So it's
what they're doing, totally. That's all. It helps them to make better atom bombs or, CD players or whatever. That's all. So all the aspects of scientific process, they're real and they're outside the realm of objective science. So that means our mind is real and it's beyond the scope of material science to explain. Our vision, our perception, same thing. You can describe the things that you see, but can you describe vision? What does vision look like? What color is it?
That's the problem of Qualia.
Yes.
Because the scientists, they're usually very poor philosophers. And so Qualia is Qualia, I think is the correct pronunciation. Qualia is the experience of the redness of red. It's like you can make a machine, when it detects the wavelength of light red, to print out a paper saying, I saw a red light. But it has no experience of redness that we do. And so all what we would say call in Sanskrit, the tanmatras, the sense objects, are philosophically called qualia, and there's absolutely zero possibility of describing them or explaining them through the mathematical process of the scientific methodology. And we have to remember that all the scientists are doing is, we only know qualia. That's all we know. So everything else, all of science is an abstraction based on Qualia with no explanation of what Qualia is. I think what Qualia are, Qualia is the plural, the singular is quale and Qualia.
There's a few scientists admit that this is the hard problem. David Chalmers, he says, look, you're never going to solve this. So let's just accept consciousness as part of what's going on. But he just thinks it's part of the universe. He doesn't understand that it's the part of the universe that's actually seeing the universe. So then we come to an important point that we do what matter can't do. One of the aspects of consciousness is that we act on the world. And we produce situations, we produce products that can't be produced by material science. Can't be produced by the material laws. So when scientists make their experiments, they make their arrangements, they're not investigating matter at all. They're investigating matter with conscious intervention. And that's one of the reasons why they can't. You've got the law of gravity, you've got the force of gravity, you've got the electromagnetic force, you've got the strong force in the atom, and you've got the weak force in the atom, and they're trying to fix them all together. And they can't, because gravity requires relatively little intervention to understand it, like Galileo's lifting weights onto an inclined plane or whatever. Electromagnetism requires more conscious intervention. Forces within the atom require much more intervention. But they don't recognize that they're actually changing matter. They don't understand that it's not just the conscious observer, it's a conscious agent. So the whole investigation of the forces of nature is totally 100% flawed. Totally.
I would propose that all of Krishna's Shaktis are achintya, inconceivable in nature. Don't think that the spiritual energy is achintya, but the material energy is not. No, the material energy is achintya. So there's a verse, 3rd canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, Sayam Bhagavato Maya Yan Nyayena Virujyate, means, this external energy of the Lord acts in a way which is Nyayena Virujyate, contradictory to reason. Nyayena Virujyate. The verse is Seyam, S-E-Y-A-M, Seyam, S-E-Y-A-M, Seyam Bhagavato,
I can find it.
Bhagavato Maya, Yan Nyayena Virujyate. Then Ishwarasya Vimuktasya Kapanyam Uttapananam. 379.
Srila Prabhupada wrote to Bhakti-Sarabdananda Maharaj. He said, you show that the Absolute is a person and prove Achintya Shakti. He said, then our movement is a great success. So, I'm distinguishing between, like, as far as I understand, that Atma Paramatma, that is accessible to logic, because it's something we can see. Even Paramatma we can see. It takes a little more. Like Srila Prabhupada points out in that purport in 2nd canto, the supersoul in the heart. But we can also see the supersoul in nature, the supersoul in relationships. That's what I understand is immanent.
Yeah, but it's more of an inference. It's an inference of buddhi.
Yes, it is. But it's undeniable.
Well, there are two things. There are two things here that I'm suggesting, because you were saying about they can't understand the atoms and everything or put all the forces together because their consciousness is involved.
Yeah.
So I'm proposing another possibility that might be worth looking into, and that is that even if the consciousness were not interfering, they still could not put all the pieces together, because Maya itself is not amenable to logic and reason. Maya itself is achintya by nature, and so actually there's a what is it called? There's a book called Tarka something, and it's quoted by Madhvacharya in his commentary on the 6th canto, and he basically says that every vastu, every substance has a dharma. it has a nature. I can look and find the verse and say I've used it in some because there were some people who saying that, oh, Hare Krishna, please come take a seat. There were some persons who were saying that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy is a Achincha Bheda Bheda Tattva, but Madhva's philosophy is a Dvaitavad, so he's not in the line of Madhvacharya. So then I presented a verse from the commentary of Madhvacharya on Srimad Bhagavatam, where he says the relationship between a substance and its Shakti is Bhed and Abhed, and then later in the next verse he says, and it's also Achincha. So I was just showing, I was just showing that the roots, the seed of Achincha Bheda Bheda Tat was already there in the commentary of Madhvacharya hundreds of years before Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu just brought it out in the open. And Madhva himself, he was quoting from one book called Tarka. Now I don't remember. That's somewhat. It was like a nyai, a logic scripture. And so, but basically, the qualities that a vastu has, you cannot question why it has that. That's the way it is. God has made it that way.
Natural.
And so in the Mahabharata it says, Achintya kaluye bhava natangs tarkena yojayet. That one should not apply reason to the achintya tattvas, to the inconceivable tattvas. And the other day Chulabhata was saying that here, na yojayet. You should not apply reason to this. So this is in Sanskrit grammar, vidiling. It's an imperative. It's for a rule. Just like Shastra says, you should not have association with another man's wife. So it's used in vidiling. That means it's not debatable, it's not negotiable, you just cannot do it. So in the same way, Bhishma Devi is saying in the Mahabharata, Achintya kaluye bhava natang starkena yojayet. You cannot do it, it's not debatable, it's not negotiable. The Shaktis that things have are achintya, and your logic cannot answer. You have to, they're self-evident, and you have to accept them as they are.
Because your mind is working by those Shaktis, so you get the same inconsistency that Ananya Ashraya does. Right the way through. So you've got the conscious faculties.
So I'm just making that distinction there, that the world may not be, you may not be able to explain or describe the world. It may not be due to conscious intervention. It can be just because that's the nature of the world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Somewhere, I don't know, it's either Chaitanya Shikshamrita or... It seems to me that it's a book by Thakur Bhaktivinoda. He says that these conscious faculties, they're proof of spirit. So they're constant actually. Matter is changing, but our ability to see doesn't change. And the next thing is that science also depends on the conscious agent. I'm seeing, I'm doing, I'm thinking. We give the Nobel Prize to people who can see in a particular way, who do in a particular way, who think in a particular way. So the conscious agent is an undeniable and directly experienceable aspect of science. So then science can't touch it.
Now, I want to throw something here for you to wrestle with.
Okay.
And that is this. That sometimes we may be in a debate, philosophical discussion with someone. And it's here. It's a new one. Yeah. It's okay. Good, I'm good. We may be in a debate with someone. And if we have more pratibha, that means more intellectual brilliance than that person, we may be able to defeat them. But at the same time, another person who's brilliant or more brilliant will be able to overturn us. And this can be a little bit disheartening for a devotee who is trying to take on a particular community and convince them about something. But it's a Vedantic conclusion. Tarka apratishtanat. That means that logic is without foundation. Because we try to use logic to convince people. And so what you have to do is, first you have to get them to admit a certain premises. And once they admit that, now you can build logic and you can go somewhere. But what this sutra is saying, that logic has no basis, means that there are no given premises. The given premises don't exist. One philosopher also wrote a book called The Myth of the Given Premise. The given premises don't exist. So if someone is, once you get someone to agree with you that something is self-evident or obvious or valid, now you can build on that. But that's only based on your agreement. Otherwise, you cannot do it. And so René Descartes, he struggled with this and gave some suggestions. And we were discussing this the other night in our class. You were not there, you would have liked this very much. He was trying to think, well, what's a starting point? What's a given? So he said, okay, ergo cogito sum. I think, therefore I am. I'm thinking so that I know I exist. That's a good start. But he proposed, how can I prove that anything else exists? And he said, well, this is a very difficult problem. And he gave an example to illustrate it. He said, what if there was a demon who had some spell, and you're just lying on the ground unconscious, and this demon has put a spell on you, and now you're thinking that you're somewhere going here and there and doing things. So now in your life you're going here and there doing things. How do you know that you're not somewhere unconscious, just under the spell of a demon, and everything you're seeing is an illusion? Just like when Krishna was fighting with Shalva. So then Shalva came on his airplane, and he pulled out Vasudeva Maharaj and said, Krishna, I've kidnapped your father. And then Shalva cuts off Vasudeva Maharaj's head, and Krishna starts crying. And then the next minute Yogamaya awakens his omniscience, and he realizes that Shalva is a magician, and actually that wasn't Vasudeva at all, and it didn't really happen. So epistemology is extremely a difficult subject. It's like slime. When you grab it, it just comes through your fingers. You can't grab hold of anything. And so René Descartes, he basically said, well, how I exist, I admit it, but how can I know that anything else is real? So then other philosophers put forward the idea, well, perhaps, how do you know that your brain is not in a vat somewhere and you're wired up to a computer and everything you're experiencing is a computer simulation? Metrics, right? Or how do you know that you're not sitting in a theater somewhere and a hypnotist has hypnotized you and you're having a hypnotic regression and you think that you were born in England and you went to Oxford University and now you're in India, like that, but you're in a theater somewhere under the control of a hypnotist? How do you know that? And then Bertrand Russell put forward another idea. It's called the 5-minute universe. He said that there could be an all-powerful being who created the universe, and he did it 5 minutes ago. Right? So every tree that he made, if you cut open those trees, they have rings that indicate that this tree is 500 years old. However, he made it with those rings 5 minutes ago.
That's what the creationists say.
And now, those who try to make this creation short, So now, any evidence that you come forward with, you can say, well, that evidence is the evidence that, 6,000 years ago, the Egyptians built the pyramids. You say, well, no, this being made that evidence 5 minutes ago to fool you. And so I put them all together and just said, well, how do you know that you're not in the show of a hypnotist who's actually a demon, who's under the spell of another demon, whose brain is in a vat, in a universe that was created 5 minutes ago, right? And no one can give an answer to that. No one can challenge it. So epistemology is like that. And so Vedanta Sutra says, tak apratishtanat, that logic has no foundation. And the reason is this. And this is a really important kind of sutra to remember. Why is logic without foundation? Because logic can process premises, but logic cannot generate its own premises. By logic, we analyze different proposals, A and B. If A and B, then C. So we analyze A and B to come up with C by logic. But logic itself cannot generate the premises that it's analyzing.
Right.
And therefore logic has no basis. And so there's a verse, it's in the Vakya Padiya of Bhartrihari. Bhartrihari is a very famous Indian king and philosopher. And he wrote a book called Vakya Padiya, which is explaining Spotvad.
Explaining what?
Spotvad, which is explanation of how meaning comes from words.
Okay.
So Bhartrihari wrote this book called Vakya Padiya, and there he wrote that whatever a brilliant logician establishes by his brilliant logic can be uprooted by another brilliant logician, and that goes on forever. And so because that also supports the Vedantic statement, Taka Patishtanat, Rupa Goswami has quoted that verse in the first volume of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu also, to prove that the truth can be known by bhakti, but it cannot be known by philosophical reasoning. Now, Descartes answered his question about the demon and everything in a beautiful way, which is very similar to the way that we address it. He is saying, how do I know that my perceptions are real and not just the creation of something evil? And I can know that my perceptions are real because God is good and He would not deceive me. And therefore my experience of the world... So the only way you can establish the truth of any statement is by accepting the existence of God and that God is good. And after that, once you've got the person to accept that, then everything flows like anything. But if you have an atheist who doesn't accept that God, who doesn't accept that God is good, now, by epistemology, you can't get a footing with them anywhere. And you may be able to get a footing because they were not able to see the surreptitious premise that you introduced into the argument without any evidence. So there's a beautiful verse also, 11th canto. You can look up the verse for Maharaj.
Yes.
Atma parigyan mayo vivada hyastiti nastiti bidata nishta vyatopi naivo parameta pumsam maya paravrita dhyasolokat. Which means,
Что означает?
Atma parigyan mayo vivada.
It's 6:4:32.
No, it isn't.
Okay, 11:22:34.
Thank you.
11:22:34.
So this is a beautiful verse, and Srila Jiva Goswami is using this in the very beginning. It's perhaps the first verse of Bhagavatam that Jiva Goswami uses in Bhakti Sandarbha to explain why you can know the truth only by devotion and why you cannot know it by philosophical reasoning. So he's saying, Atma Parigyana Mayo Vivada, that a person who's turned their heart away from God, then the default position of being, when you turned away from God, the default position is that you go into vivad. That means logical arguments. So Atma Parigyana Mayo Vivada, and what do? Hyastiti nastiti. It is true, it is not true. It is real, it is not real. Bidata nishta. And you have nishta, that is the faith in this process of analyzing what is true and false and what is real and what is not real. But vyatopi, although this activity is vyata, it's useless, because you cannot establish what is real or unreal or true or false. Parameta pungsam. But that person is addicted to it, he cannot give it up.
Yeah.
Because this state of oscillating uncertainty, it's true, it's not true, it's real, it's unreal, is the default stage of the consciousness which is turned away from God.
It's like Daksha in his prayers. He says, I'm offering my obeisance.
Yes, 6th canto.
So the way, I wouldn't say the way around that, but the answer to that, the response to that, when I first came to Gurudev, I was still pretty keen on scientific preaching.
Yes.
So first, when I was in Mathura, Paramadwaiti Maharaj said, we're having a discussion, scientists in Vrindavan. So I asked Gurudev about it. I said, they're having a discussion. Can I go? He said, yes, you can go. If you think you have time. I have no time. It will not produce pav. So I put the whole thing on the back burner, and then we were in Moscow airport, 2004. No, it wasn't 2004. It was 2002. Anyway, whenever. And then we were just talking about this and that, and then he suddenly looked at me. He said, "You can start preaching to the scientists." I went, "Is that what you want?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I think you're ready now. I saw you weren't ready before, but I think you're ready now." Then I went to Hawaii, and he said, "It's no use preaching to scientists. They're not going to change their minds." So the next day I came to him and I said, "Gurudev, I decided I'm not going to preach to scientists, but I'll preach to people who've been affected by the scientists." He said, "Yes, the scientists won't change their minds." So what I'm aiming at is not absolute certainty, because I know that's impossible. But we can have practical certainty, because we need a way out of the fix that material society is in right now. And because everything's under such a cloud, there's no practical agreement on the way forward. There's no practical agreement that actually the Vedic process is the one true process. So my entrepreneurs, they have to select their message and they have to select their audience. So my audience is not atheistic scientists who aren't going to change their minds. My audience is conscious thought leaders and change makers. Innovative conscious thought leaders and change makers. And what I want to show is that there is something that we can be certain of by experience and which can't be denied. And this idea that material science can't look at itself, that produces a series of entities that can be experienced directly and cannot be denied. And after I was channeling somebody, I didn't know who it was. But the answers being supplied stage by stage. I kind of write down and work it out, and then I say, okay, next stage. And then I'd be in the toilet or in the shower, and it would come again. So then later on, I met Sripad Goswami in Sweden, and I explained what I was doing. And he said, yes, this is Jiva Goswami's definition of tattva in Sarvasamvardhani, which I've never read, and I'm not sure there's even a translation. So, like for example, the fact that I exist. Descartes said, I can doubt everything, but I can't doubt myself because I'm doubting. There's somebody who's doubting. So then David Hume said, well, there's some people believe there's a conscious self. But whenever I try to find the conscious self, all I find is a feeling or a thought. So I don't believe there is any such thing as a conscious self. So who's that I who's looking for the conscious self? So we have self-validating entities which are self-evident. The conscious I is self-evident. I'm doing this, I'm thinking this. But it's also self-evident in the denial. I don't believe there's a conscious self. Okay, who's that I? I don't believe that vision is real, or I don't believe that thinking is real. Well, who's that I? So we can experience ourselves directly. Because everyone, I'm doing that. I know this. And that's the whole basis of giving awards to scientists, on the one hand. And on the other hand, the senses can't be denied. The thinking can't be denied. The activity can't be denied, because that denial is also an activity. So these are self-evident, self-validating entities. And the conscious self is also a self-evident, self-validating entity. So people who are inclined to accept common sense can accept that, and we can move forward together. And the others, God bless them. That's all. It's like I'm working with these entrepreneurs, and they're really emphasizing, if you want to get ahead, you have to solve problems. In other words, if you're just selling your own product, you're producing stuff because you really want to produce it, you may not be too successful. But if you can find out what people really want and need, and you tailor your message in such a way, like when people want love, yeah. But people want a way out of the mess. So they say you sell what they want and give them what they need. means whenever you find out what's the main anxiety, you say, okay, yeah, well, this solves that main anxiety. And you give a whole slew of other stuff as well, which is really needed.
I think on a societal scale, it's really helpful to get into the mass psyche that the scientific methodology itself is neither inherently theist or atheist.
Yeah.
The methodology itself does not include any ontological conclusions whatsoever, and so it can never be the mystique or the prestige of science can never be appropriated to the atheist agenda, because the methodology itself doesn't tell us anything ontological. That's really important, because there's a great confusion in the minds of the masses of the people that science has basically explained everything in principle, and now we're just trying to fill in the details. And the explanation essentially says that there's no God or soul or heaven or anything like that. So, but they're only convinced of that because of the predictive powers given us, whatever, iPhones and television and things like that,
and weapons
and weapons and so on. But the scientific methodology itself is completely neutral, doesn't tell us anything ontological, doesn't answer any questions, does neither support theology or atheism.
They're using, they started with methodological objectivism. And then, by sleight of hand, they changed over to ontological objectivism or metaphysical objectivism, where they believe that it's only objects. But there's somebody wrote a paper on the website of the American Association for some AAAS, and he showed that scientism is not actually scientific. This idea that being objective actually produces some kind of answer to reality is itself not scientific. You can't address it scientifically. So scientism is not scientific, just like science is supernatural. They're really, really messed up. They got their undies in a twist. Yes, yeah. So you can go further, actually, and show that Paramatma is also inherent, because you've got this conscious eye, so many conscious eyes. They can't be explained physically. Just like, who's going to watch? Anyone going to watch? Okay, what's the time?
12:47.
12:47. Okay, I say 12:45. It's pretty much the same. Anybody else?
12:41.
12:41. Oh. 12:47. Where did this watch come from? Do watches grow on? Do watches kind of appear out of the rocks? Do they come by somebody made it? Okay. So you've got something which is physically inexplicable, and you've got a whole bunch of them agreeing with each other. So how did that happen? So there's some deeper cause for the fact that all the watches agree. Similarly, we're like watches. You can't explain where we come from physically, but we can agree. Like we're talking about very deep aspects of philosophy and love, and we can agree. So where's that agreement coming from? Devotees will say that God is love.
Philosophically, that's the condition for the possibility of communication.
Yeah. So we can say that God is love, and the scientists, if they're really, really honest, they would have to agree that God is agreement. The fact that we can actually agree is a manifestation of Paramatma. Because it's an essential part of science. Scientists have to agree.
But we can go deeper than that and say the fact that we disagree is also a sign of Paramatma, because we have to communicate in order to understand whether we agree or not.
Yeah.
So even our disagreement is a sign that communication was successful, and the Paramatma is the precondition for the possibility of communication.
The natural, inherent position is agreeing. And disagreeing is but actually agreement is fundamental. Love. Because love is the basic truth. Of course, in man, there's disagreement and so on, there's different flavors.
You can make an argument for anything. You see, one person read the Bhagavad Gita and decided that Dhritarashtra is God.
Very cool.
Because God is love, and love is blind.
Oh my God.
Did you just make that up? Arguments are like this. You can establish it. You know, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a young man, young boy at school, then he was an arrogant scholar because he was studying Navya Nyaya. So Navya Nyaya, yeah, that means the logic, new type of logic. There's the old school of logic that is from Gautam Rishi from hundreds of years before. But just prior to the birth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, maybe in just a few centuries before, a new school of logic came about in Mithila, Navya Nyaya. And it was really, really more complex than the original style of logic. The vase. So Maharaj, just imagine you're at school of Gangadas Pandit in Navadvip. And we're all the classmates of Nimai Pandit, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is how Nimai Pandit and his friends, they used to pass their time, having a lot of fun. And they used to cross the Ganga, they used to go to Vidyanagar. And there were the teachers, the professors, and that means disciples and grand disciples of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who had some years before moved to Puri. Mahaprabhu will deal with him later. But Nimai Pandit used to go and challenge the professors and the students to various arguments based on Navya Nyaya. So, Maharaj, as you can see, there are some flowers in this vase. Right? There are some flowers in this vase.
There's an appearance of them.
Well, okay, they're fake flowers. Okay. There are some fake flowers in this vase.
It looks as though there's some fake flowers in the vase. A broken vase.
Okay, so I'm saying that there are no flowers in this vase. There are no fake flowers in this vase, and there is no appearance of flowers in this vase also. So whatever you say, I'm saying no to all of those. Okay. So, and I can make a wager. The boys used to make bets with each other. 100 rupees. That there are no flowers in this vase, or fake flowers in this vase, or appearance of fake flowers in this vase. Whichever position you want to take, we can accept all of them. So, do you agree with me or not?
I think we have different points of view.
Are there flowers in this vase or not?
Yes.
Yes.
You also have different point of view.
No. Then in Navina you say, no, there are no flowers in this vase. And the proof is that when the person was making this vase, he took the plastic or the glass or whatever it's made of, and he melted it, and he put it into the mold to make this vase. Now the question is, when he put it in the mold to make this vase, did he add some flowers or not? No, he didn't. And therefore there are no flowers in the vase. Right? Okay? Then Mahaprabhu, he would take his money, you have been defeated, and then go to the next scholar like this. So, this is Navya Nyaya, because if you say something is in something else, it may be in there by samavaya sambandha, or it may be present by samyog sambandha. So I didn't specify. Samavaya sambandha means that it's actually inherent in the object. So there are no flowers inherent in the object. But by samyog sambandha, by contact, by touch, there are flowers in the vase. So we can say there are flowers in the vase by samyog sambandha. But there are no flowers in the vase by Samavaya Sambandha, like this. So, in this way, Nimai Pandit, when he was a child, he was going everywhere, quarreling with everyone, and having a lot of fun. But after he was initiated, and his bhav came, then he gave up. He'd written a commentary on Navanyaya, and he bound it up and he threw it in the Ganges. So we don't even know what's in it. He didn't want anyone to know what's in it. He wanted to throw it away. Because all this type of logic and everything, it can be entertaining to get prestige or defeat another person, but it cannot touch reality. The reality can be, you cannot touch reality. Atashi Krishna Namadi Nabhavat Graham Indriyai. Our senses cannot touch, what to speak of Krishna. Cannot touch his name, his qualities. The description of his name and qualities, nothing. Everything is beyond our senses. But if we, Sevanmukhi Jivado, if we become servants and serve Krishna, Krishna can touch us. Swayam eva spuratyadaha. So this is also scientific. That if it's the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadyasya yataha Shastra yonitvat. So it's the beginning of Vedanta Sutra. God is the cause of everything. So the effects cannot discover their own cause. The effects cannot find their cause. But the cause can reveal himself to his effects. So Shastra yonitvat means that God, you can only know God when He reveals Himself to you, and His primary revelation is through Vedas, through Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and then through His devotees as well together. So it's logical, it's scientific to assume that an all-powerful being whom you cannot see. If someone says, well, how can you prove that there's God? Then we say, the fact that you cannot prove that there's God proves that God is omnipotent. Because if God is hiding Himself from you now, that means He doesn't want you to see Him right now. And because He's omnipotent and He doesn't want you to see Him right now, therefore there is nothing that you can possibly do to find Him. And it's totally consistent with an omnipotent God that you cannot prove Him by your own. So what I'm saying is, if an empiricist says there's no evidence for God, but that's just already assuming that there's no God. If you assume that there is an omnipotent God, then it's perfectly consistent with logic that you would not be able to prove Him, prove His existence by any means whatsoever. He could only prove Himself. It's perfectly logically consistent. So it's simply not an argument to say, well, where's the evidence? That there's no evidence is the evidence. If you accept the existence of God, and if you don't already, then you have not proved anything by saying that you cannot prove Him. That's not an argument. How many points have you done?
It's time already 1 o'clock.
Oh.
No.
So now it's time for lunch? We can discuss again. How long are you in Vrindavan, Maharaj?
I leave on the 22nd.
22nd.
On 21st will be our drama.
21st?
On 20th we have a drama. 2 dramas.
2 separate?
Yeah.
Yes.
One on the 20th. 20th is the anniversary of the Radha Shamasundar's appearance here. So there'll be a huge festival for the whole day. And in the evening there'll be a drama. And then the next day there'll also be another drama in the evening. So, but every morning at 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock till 11 o'clock every morning, Rasa Leela Katha. And every evening from 4:30 till 6:30, I'll continue to speak on Dhammadrastakam. Now we're coming very soon to Namo Radhikaya Twadya. Radha Tatu will come.
So, okay. Very nice discussion. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
7.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Jai Gaura, Hari Bol, Jai Gaura, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Jai Gaura, Hari Bol. Shila Gurudev ki jai, Prabhupada ki jai, Prem Gosi Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktabinda ki jai, Sri Vadamana Katamana Gaura Mandal ki jai, Kari Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Sri Radha Govinda Govinatha Manan Mohanju ki jai, Ananta Kori Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Bhaktabinda ki jai, Madhes Rasa Sri Shabhalu Nandini Smati Radharani ki jai, Gaura Premananda